feed.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And of course, if you'd like to ask our panel a question, the number 0345 6060 973. Well, welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It comes from Julie in my hometown of Tunbridge Wells. Hello, Julie.
Hi, Ian. Hello, good evening.
Hi.
So I'm a self-employed travel agent, and I've been refunding and rebooking my customers since April 2020, and I've not earned any salary at all in that time since travel stopped. I'd just like to ask the panel, do they think that the government are sending mixed messages at the moment around the traffic light system for international travel?
Lee Rowley, let's come to you first.
I don't think it's mixed messages. I think it's a recognition that we're in a fluid period of time and we're trying to reopen elements of what we all want to do as quickly as possible. We want to get back to normal, whether that's in our daily lives or going on holiday. But it is just a challenge to do that at the moment. And so what we've tried to do is move away from just a full ban on travel other than for exceptional circumstances, which was in place for the last few months, to trying to get to a place where there is a gradation. There are countries which can now be visited to allow people to do that should they wish, but also recognising that there are still a large number of countries around the world where it's not really appropriate to do so other than an emergency. And I realise that causes significant issues and huge issues, particularly in your industry, and I'm very sorry for that. But at the moment, it's a reflection of the very fluid situation on the ground. And I think that's going to be the case for a little while yet, unfortunately.
But isn't it incumbent on government ministers to actually sing from the same hymn sheet here? We've had George Eustice, we've had Boris Johnson, we've had Matt Hancock, we've had Simon Hart, all giving totally different interpretations of what the word amber means. That cannot go on.
The government has a clear statement on the website, which is advises against...
Well, why don't government ministers actually read their own website then?
Well, they do. I mean, we advise against all non-essential travel to amber and red list countries. But then you inevitably get into this discussion about what does that mean in this circumstance or that scenario. And there are as many scenarios as there are often people who are actually travelling or may want to travel. And you have to pull back at some point and say, look, the government's trying to create a framework around here to make sure that there is the ability to travel in certain circumstances. We trust in people's ability to make those decisions and make those determinations within those guidelines, and people will have to make their own conclusions. But the statement is really clear: no non-essential travel to amber and red list countries unless and until there is the review, which will happen once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Lee, I have a rule in life that whenever a politician says this is very clear, it's usually a good indication that it's far from clear. And I'm not. You must understand, surely, that if Simon Hart goes on the radio and says, well, of course, people think that going on holiday is an emergency for them, and then Matt Hancock says something different, and then Boris Johnson says something different, and George Eustice says something different, you've got to surely admit that the message is a little bit blurred, even if it's been clarified today.
Well, this is what we've had at points over the last year where, in a period where there are a lot of rules and a lot of regulations and a lot of legislation, something that myself as a Conservative is not very keen on because you get into these kind of arbitrary discussions, but we've accepted that it's necessary for a temporary period of time as a result of coronavirus. You have all of these very challenging questions. And ultimately, as I say, there are as many scenarios as there are people thinking through doing this, whether it's holidays in this instance or something else when the rules were different on some other element of daily life. And we get that it's difficult. And one of the reasons why it is so challenging is because all of these different layers of rules and regulations cause challenged people to interpret them. But we hope that when people pull back and stand back, they recognise that it's relatively clear that no non-essential travel to amber and red list countries means don't go unless you have to.
Angela, you're shaking your head. I can sense you're keen to get in.
I think we've had nothing but confusion from government ministers, and I think if things were clear, then you would have expected that all the government ministers that were on media rounds and expecting to be interviewed would have the same story and would have got the story straight so they could explain it to everybody else. I think the vast majority of people in this country want to do the right thing. They want to stick by the rules. They want to be as safe as possible. There's also a great yearning to get to the sun and have some kind of break after a year and a half of lockdown and all the worries and the stresses that the coronavirus pandemic has caused. So the minimum the government could have done was get its story straight. And I think the government really is caught between two stools, and it has been right since the beginning of this pandemic. They want to basically say it's up to you what you do and leave people to make their own decisions because of the libertarian bent that there is in the government. But when you've got a pandemic... Is
that a bad thing, to have trust in people? Surely that's a good thing, to trust people to do the right thing.
Of course not. But when you have an infectious pandemic where some people who spread it might not get it themselves but may spread it and kill other people, there are some public health issues that you have to deal with. And I think the government have struggled with that basic problem right from the beginning, and many tens of thousands of people have died because of it. I think by the end, what they really need after a year and a half of this, to get the story straight, be clear, say that there might be some changes at the last minute if situations change, but the minimum they could do is tell us what green means, what amber means, and what red means. They couldn't put India on the red list for 14 days because it was inconvenient to Boris Johnson. We've had 110 aeroplanes arrive direct from India since the variant. We know that 5% of people have tested positive for the Indian variant. It's now spreading across the country in 80 local authorities because they can't get their approach right. I think the vast majority of people in this country would follow the rules if they knew what they were.
Okay. India, I'm going to take you off the red list for now. What do you think of what the government have done here? Because when in this kind of crisis, and it still is a crisis, I guess it is difficult for a government to get things right all the time. But Keir Starmer's message at Prime Minister's Questions today, I guess, was people need a clear message, otherwise they won't know what to do. Where do you fall on this?
Yes, well, first of all, Ian, my greatest sympathies to Julie, the travel agent, because what a disastrous communication campaign this has been. You would think Gerald Ratner was in charge of comms, the mixed messages. I've heard 4 different versions today of what amber means, and I think amber is the problem. It's all very well saying, we're going to trust people to use their common sense and make their own decisions. But governments are elected to lead. And when you have that middle area, it's just causing confusion. So if it was me in charge of government, I would just simply have a red where you cannot go, or a green where you can go. And clarity is going to be the key. Then you can carry on. But at the moment, this amber element is just causing too much confusion for everybody, both the travel industry, the general public, and ministers themselves, it would seem.
And Ndidi Okezie, what does amber mean to you? Because I think it means different things to different people. If you look at the highway code, it does mean stop. But I suspect many people interpret it as get set.
Mm.
I really think we sometimes underestimate how little the general public follow all of these sound bites and conversations that happen. I think it's been a really interesting year just to watch the way that our government works in terms of, I don't honestly think, I really am struck by Angela's reflections, but the reality is there's nothing the government would have done that there wouldn't have been some kind of challenge to, or something that's just the way that we're built as a society. There's got to be an opposition somewhere. I think the reality is this still continues to be a really important, significant period for people. I think Julie's point is really what we should focus on. I understand amber to be allowed versus advised to do. I honestly don't understand the confusion of that. I think if there wasn't an amber, there would have been challenge around why is there just a red and a green. I think the reality of the pandemic is I'm not really sure there's any path that could have been taken that somebody would not find opposition to. And really, I think that it is important for ministers particularly to be repeating the same messages, but let's not cloud that with the notion that the message itself could have been perfect. There is nothing we could have done throughout this past year that you would get widespread consensus on. And so the reality is that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are people like Julie, there are people who are trying to navigate their way through this pandemic. And let's not get lost in the lull of just enjoying the debate and the distraction, if that makes sense.
Just a final word from you, Lee, on this. It's said that, I don't know where this figure comes from, but 5 million people have booked trips to amber classified countries. That could be catastrophic, could it not, if that figure is true? If they come back, who knows who they've mixed with, if maybe 20% of them don't obey the quarantine rules when they come back, that could put us back a long way.
Well, I haven't seen that figure, and I would just caution people to be very careful over the coming months. It is a challenge, I accept, and Ndidi is absolutely right about the particular challenge in the travel industry. But we all would like to get away. Angela's absolutely right. We'd all like to get away in the summer, but at the moment, there is real challenge around it. We wish it wasn't the case. We hope that more can move onto the green list in the coming months. I presume a lot of the people you're referencing are booking on the basis of hoping that's the case. Let's hope that we get there, and the data still is moving in the right direction. But at the moment, there is clarity. Don't travel to amber or red list countries for anything other than non-essential reasons.
Let's go back to our caller, Julie, in Tunbridge Wells. Can you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel now for your business, Julie, or do you still think things are really uncertain and up in the air? You don't know whether the June 21st easing is going to continue?
I mean, I think it is clearer, amazingly, than it was in 2020 when it was just chaos. But I just do think that the amber is a bit of an issue, because if people can't travel to the amber, then why isn't it just red? So I think that would be a lot easier. And obviously, if the government ministers did stop contradicting each other, that would really help, because obviously customers listen to all the different media outlets. They watch the TV, they listen to the radio, and they have no idea whether they can go, they can't go, what it all means. Is just a bit of a minefield. I do think that later this year it is going to get better. There will be a way through it. There is a way through it. I've got customers going to Madeira, Portugal in the next few weeks. So, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel might be a bit longer than we thought.
Well, good luck to you, Julie. Thank you very much indeed for calling in. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC's Cross Question. It's 8:15.
LBC. Hey, Harry. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 18 minutes past 8 on Cross Question. Let's go to our next caller. It's Chris in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello there. Hello, panel. My question is, has the government been asleep at the wheel when it comes to managing the spread of the Indian variant of COVID?
Ndidi, Okezie.
I don't believe so. I think that I find this whole period, we've been in a global pandemic. I think that the process around managing it remains complicated. I think people are really keen to get back and out, and in terms of getting on with their lives. And one of the things I know that the government have reinforced quite often is the notion that they don't want, every step needs to be irreversible. So I believe that, the focusing on surge testing and trying to ensure that people are vaccinated in that community seems inherently sensible. I do think we are underestimating how difficult it's going to be to pull back once and if we have to. So I really do feel confident that they are doing what they're meant to be doing in this. But I think the reality is we are dealing with an unknown enemy, as it were.
I mean, hindsight is always easy in these circumstances, but a lot of people were saying many, many weeks ago, why don't you put India on the red list? And they didn't. And, I mean, people would draw the conclusion that the reason that this Indian variant is now getting traction in this country is for that reason.
But I guess that's the exact point. Hindsight is 2020, and I think that, there are lots of things, I'm sure, with all of the reviews we're going to be able to say, and hands down, I think if government are in any way suggesting that they've been perfect through all this, that would be laughable. But the reality is, I'm pretty sure there were lots of various conversations that happened at the point, and the decision was made not to take it, not to put it on the list at that time. I don't know that doing so would have prevented what we've seen, because again, we've seen examples of it over the last year as well. So I think the reality is, how do we deal with something when it occurs, and are we equipped to ensure that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over again?
India Willoughby.
Yeah, well, I do think they've been slow out the blocks. I mean, last month, Boris had to cancel his trip to for the trade talks to India because of concerns of COVID over there. And they have known for weeks that there's a serious problem. So, yes, once again, slow out the box. But this is symptomatic of the whole handling of the crisis. From the very start, they've been caught between a rock and a hard place. They're a rabbit in the headlights and they don't know what to do. And my take on it, Iain, is that they're actually looking to the future here. And they're well aware that there are going to be lots of inquiries on various aspects, from the actual handling of the pandemic itself onto the issuing of contracts for protective gear. All of that's going to come further down the line. And that they want to be able to look back and say, oh, well, we said this, we didn't do that. They're actually saying two things at the same time on everything. There is a lack of clarity. If you're right, surely that they would have adopted a safety first policy, and they would have locked down everything to do with India right from the beginning. Well, no, I take the opposite view. I think they're keeping it. They're trying to keep. They're actually keeping things loose. But the rhetoric, the statements that are coming out, as we've heard today, are contradictory. Some are hard, some are soft, and that covers all the bases. So further down the line, they'll forget about the stance that proves to be incorrect, and they will point to the statements that were correct. They're saying two things at once, but definitely slow out the blocks, and they've acted way too slow. Okay. They knew about the India variant.
Angela Eagle, do you think they've been asleep at the wheel on this?
I think they've been very slow off the blocks right from the beginning of the pandemic. And there may have been a reason for the complacency at the beginning, although I think it put people's lives at risk. But there's no reason for them to be making the same mistakes over and over again, always to be behind the curve in terms of where the pandemic is. We've known that variants are a problem. They put Pakistan and Bangladesh on the red list because of the Indian variant, but not India. Was it until 15 days later? Was it a coincidence that was because Boris Johnson wanted to visit India and see India and actually have a big post-Brexit trade talk? I suspect it was. And he has to explain why Bangladesh and Pakistan, which had much lower levels of the Indian variant, went on the red list much earlier than India itself. Prime Minister Modi has been incredibly complacent about the spread of the Indian variant across his country, allowing sporting events, the general election, big religious festivals, and now untold thousands of people who could have been saved are dying in India. We are now the country which has got the largest infection rate of the Indian variant outside of India itself. Since India went on the red list, we've now got 110 flights that have come in directly. We know from testing that 5% of the people that come in are infected with the Indian variant. There's no surprise that, given that the quarantine's not working properly, that we've now got 80 local authority areas that have got community spread of the Indian variant, and 1 in 5 of the infections of COVID in this country now are the Indian variant. Now, it may be that the Indian variant is going to be dominant, as Chris Whitty said. It may be that we have to hope that the Indian variant will not escape the vaccines like the South African one may have done. But this is all risks that didn't have to be taken if there'd have been faster, more resolute action from the government.
Lee Rowley, obviously you're not going to say the government was asleep at the wheel. I get that. But Angela there said that this country has more cases of the Indian variant than any other country outside India and the surrounding countries. What do you put that down to?
One of the reasons is that we have such good genomic sequencing. We absolutely lead the world in making sure we understand as quickly as possible what is going on with coronavirus and the different types of variants. So it is going to be that things show up in the UK first, because we do an awful lot of focus on that, unlike other countries elsewhere in the world. But, I think to some extent Angela is arguing with a virus. India is arguing with a virus. Unless you are going to perpetually close your country down and never let anybody in, which some countries are doing. Australia is trying that, still has a small amount of coronavirus, but unless you're going to do that, and we can't do that because 75% of our food supplies come in from an integrated European supply chain, a substantial proportion of our medicines, you have to accept that the variants will move around the world and that they will come here eventually. And so in the same way that the Kent variant got out of the UK and went all around the world, despite everybody else's attempt to keep it out from the UK. So the focus of the government should be on trying to mitigate and manage that, which is exactly what we're doing by boosting vaccinations, by putting surge testing in. And yes, I'd like to have kept it out, but in the same way I never wanted coronavirus to come here in the first place. But the first recorded case of the Indian variant in the UK, I think, was on the 22nd of February. So all this discussion, which Angela and India have just been pointing out, was March and April. It was already here. They're arguing with the virus.
But the point is the point is that Pakistan and Bangladesh were put on the red list and India wasn't. And had it been, it is surely arguable that a lot of these cases would not have arrived in this country.
And as I understand at the time, the testing rates of people coming back from Pakistan and Bangladesh had 3 times the positivity rates of India. And what this demonstrates is that ultimately this thing moves very fast, that we have much better systems and processes than we did this time last year or even this time last winter. But still we are trying to deal with a highly contagious virus, and we're having to do that very delicate and difficult balance between trying to allow as much of normal life to go on as possible whilst trying to protect people. And we have closed down direct flights to India. We have installed hotel quarantine. We have put ways in which we can try to bear down on this variant getting out around the country. But it was impossible to stop it coming here, just like I'm afraid it will be impossible to stop another variant coming to us in the future and us exporting other variants in the future as well. The important thing is we deal with them quickly.
Okay.
When they're here.
Well,
Angela, you wanted to come back?
I just think that on the precautionary principle, instead of accepting that all variants are always going to get everywhere, we need to give ourselves a bit of time to test whether they escape the vaccines. Because if we got a variant that completely escaped the vaccines, we'd be back where we were in March 2020. And so let's use our science. Let's be able to have a look at the genomes. Let's check and test whether new variants that emerge in the world actually are a threat like that before we're so complacent about letting them into the country. There's nothing wrong with having a bit more of a precautionary principle about this, rather than arguing, as Lee seems to be, that we should let all variants rip everywhere and just hope the scientists will
Well, to be fair, he wasn't arguing that.
That's not what he said.
And Ndidi.
But that's not what he said at all. And I guess this is the point about being able to have a proper conversation without it becoming a political tennis match. The reality, the thing that strikes me in all of this debate is that there are just as many people who are furious that the government didn't act quickly enough as there are people who thought that we acted too quickly because their businesses were affected and that, their livelihoods were locked down in so many instances, whether it's travel or not. And so the reality in this is that I just think we're dealing with a beast that there is no scenario in which there is any path that
that may be right, but your argument, surely, if you follow it to its logical extent, would be never to question what the government has done, because
no, not at all.
There will be some people who say they did it too quickly and some people who said they were too slow.
What I'm saying is that let's not get stuck into the notion that there is a beautiful solution that everybody would be happy with. Difficult decisions have to be made, and that is the role of the government. And again, I am not here to defend the government.
Saying there's a perfect solution. Nobody's saying there's a perfect solution, but I think this government have consistently been behind the curve, and they haven't learned from errors that they made in the earlier stages of lockdown, and they've kept on making the same mistakes over and over again, and that's a real shame.
If you go through what you are suggesting, which was we go with the precautionary principle, this thing was here on the 22nd of February. I don't even think it had been identified as what it was in India on the 22nd of February. So your natural conclusion is that you close down the UK for all travel for good for a period of months until you work out what's happening. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and we'll never get out of it.
Okay, right.
It's unreasonable to do what you're suggesting.
Let's go back to our caller, Chris in Richmond. What's your answer to your own question?
Well, yes, they have been asleep at the wheel. Lee, I'm sorry you're gaslighting people. In terms of the comparisons with Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, go to BBC Fact Check right now and you'll find that what Matt Hancock said in the Commons the other day is factually incorrect, and what you stated is factually incorrect in terms of positivity rate. So that's a lie. Secondly, I came back from Argentina where there was 2,500 cases per day in January, and I flew back via Madrid and had to stay at home for 10 days. So why India was not put on the red list back in the beginning of April at least is unfathomable, and direct flights to continue is just insane, frankly. I think the government has been completely reprehensible in the way it's managed it, and the excuses, Lee, are pathetic, frankly. The government has not learned, and Angela is exactly right on this.
OK, Chris, thank you very much. We'll have more of your questions to our panel in a moment. 0345 60 60973. And stand by for my big announcement. It's 8:31 News Headlines with Tim Humphrey.
The Health Secretary's confirmed surge testing and vaccination will be expanded into new areas to tackle the Indian COVID-19 variant. Almost 3,000 cases have now been identified in the UK. That's up nearly 30% on Monday. The consumer group Which has warned the reopening of international travel is at risk of descending into farce. A report says many firms are continuing to sell holidays to amber destinations despite a government warning not to go. Israel's resisted US pressure for a significant de-escalation in the Gaza conflict. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will press ahead with an offensive to target Hamas militants. And the weather, many areas becoming quite clear and chilly this evening. Showery rain across parts of Scotland and a low of 3 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:35 on LBC. Well, one of our Twitter followers has stolen my thunder a bit. John Gittins on Twitter says, should Cross Question be more than once a week? Well, I'm here to tell you that from next week, Cross Question will be on 3 times a week at 8 o'clock on Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. We've had such brilliant feedback from you since we restarted it in March, because obviously over lockdown we didn't do it because I couldn't really host it from my bedroom. But Robbie has put together some fantastic panels. He's my producer over the past few weeks, and we've had a lot of people say, can you do it a bit more often? So that's what we're going to do from next week. And if I tell you, our first panel on Monday consists of Diane Abbott, the former Shadow Home Secretary, Sarah Vine, the Mail columnist, Polly Toynbee, the Guardian columnist, and the Cabinet Minister Brandon Lewis. That's the kind of quality that you're going to get used to. But you're used to it tonight with our wonderful panel here. We have with us Dame Angela Eagle, Labour MP for Wallasey, and she's a member of the Treasury Select Committee. India Willoughby, broadcaster, journalist and reality TV personality. And Ndidi Okezie, who's Chief Executive of UK Youth. And Lee Rowley, who's Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party and Conservative MP for North East Derbyshire. I'm going to go to a text question next. Mary in Southampton asks, I'm a nurse in A&E and we're seeing a growing number of children attending hospital after self-harming. Is the government doing enough to support young people's mental health? Well, we marked Mental Health Week last week, and this is a subject that comes up increasingly often, I find, on the programme. And Ndidi Okezie, you're Chief Executive of UK Youth. I'm going to come to you first again on this. Just explain in 20 seconds what UK Youth is.
Great. UK Youth is a national charity. So we have around 8,000 youth organisations across the UK. We work with nation partners in other parts of the UK as well. And it's primarily focused on organisations and work that support young people through youth work. So thinking about the development of young people, skills development, personal development, character development. So to go directly to the question, I think one of the things that's really happened over the last year is that the inequity of experience and opportunities for young people, I think, has become much more clear for lots of people. And when you think about the reality for lots of young people, in terms of the opportunities they have in their home, the fact that their homes may not feel safe, the fact that for so many young people interacting with each other is an incredibly critical part of their development, we, I guess, could even begin to start understanding why mental health issues have become so prominent. And I think the reality is that the government definitely needs to do more on this. I think we all need to do more. I think this is one of those things where the language around mental health needs to be reinforced. What's our understanding of mental health issues, and how do we start speaking to it in a way that takes away the stigma and really ensures that young people have the kind of support they need all the way through and in every environment that they may be. So I definitely think that there's been a step change in awareness around this, but I really believe it's just at the beginning of what it needs to be.
Angela Eagle, let me come to you next. I'm actually going to ask all three of you to keep your remarks fairly brief on this so we can squeeze in an extra question. Do you think that, look, everybody's going to say more needs to be done, but how do we quantify that? What one thing would you like to see government do to support young people's mental health?
Well, we need to try and shift the services to much more prevention and have a much more holistic approach to mental health in general. It's the case for young people, obviously, but also others. We don't deal with crisis very well. Youth services are not statutory, and therefore they've borne the brunt of cuts over the last 11 years. That makes it harder. Increasingly in my own constituency, I see that when people are in crisis, whatever age they are, the systems and the support really isn't there. The waiting lists are too long. And so until it gets really acute, it's almost impossible to get treatment or talking therapies. And that is before the effects of the pandemic. The lockdowns have had a tremendously difficult effect for very, very many people. There are a lot of people who've been very isolated and felt alone. A good thing is that people now talk about it a lot more, and some of my colleagues in the House of Commons have made some very brave speeches about their own struggles with mental health. That all helps to take away the stigma, but we've got a very, very long way to go.
Lee Rowley, Angela is right that it is a subject that we talk a lot about now in the media, in politics, much more than we did 5 or 10 years ago, maybe. But looking at the support services that there are in your constituency, how would you like to see them improved?
I mean, I'd like to see some of the waiting list times come down as well, and we recognise that there is absolutely more work to be done on that. Angela will have had the same experience as I have, and I'm sure the whole panel will have done in some way, shape, or form. When you get the call from a resident of your constituency who says my daughter or my son is really, really struggling, and we've tried to access services at school, we've tried to work out ways in which CAMS will work, the Child and Adult Mental Health Service. It is a real challenge, and there are thousands of dedicated people working across North Derbyshire and across the country to try and help. And there's a lot more money gone into this. There's a lot more commitment that has gone into this, parity of mental and physical health. But this is a long journey, which has started a number of years ago and is going to take a number of years yet. But just like the other panellists, we do have to do more here. There is a recognition on the part of the government that there is more to do, and I support that recognition.
India, you've written a lot about this subject. What's your answer to Mary's question?
Yeah, well, I've got a great deal of sympathy for young people. I think they're very much the forgotten sector of society in this. We hear about mental health, people at work, of working age, and the elderly. But I think in the future, we are going to pick up the receipts for what is happening now. The fact that children have missed out not just on education, a physical education with a teacher in the classroom, but also the social side, the interaction and developing those skills. And I know you're conscious of time. Just going forward, I would like to see things such as youth clubs be reintroduced. I think it's just as important, probably more so, to concentrate on the social side, because we want good citizens coming through, and that's the area that I would be looking at.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's go to our next caller. It's Moshe in Boreham Wood. Hello, Moshe.
Hi, and good evening. Thanks for taking my call, and good evening to you, the panel. I wanted to know something. In 2005, when the Israelis gave back the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority to take control of and to rule once again, until that point, there was relative peace, and then all of a sudden, 2007 comes along, Hamas takes over with a military coup, and then things really flare up. Now there's all of a sudden calls for peace. We must get around the table with Hamas, must talk to them, and flesh out a peace treaty. My question is simple. Do you see an everlasting peace between Hamas, or should we say the Gaza Strip? Well, Hamas is under control of it, and Israel, what's your take? Do you see an everlasting peace?
So effectively, is a lasting peace possible while Hamas remains in control of Gaza?
Hamas is absolutely.
Okay,
Hamas is
fine.
under control. Yeah.
Angela Eagle.
Well, I think the tragedy of what's gone on over time in the Middle East and the horrific scenes that we've been seeing in the last few weeks, the children being murdered, the bombing of civilians, the fact that civilians on both sides are targeted, is really about the fact that those that tried to make peace many years ago were assassinated by the extremists on their own side. If you think of Sadat, if you think of Rabin, and that what's happened in the absence of a peace process directed, as it had been in the past, by the US, has been just the growth of extremism and violence, and that makes it harder and harder to see a way out. Without there being bridges built between people who want a two-state solution and to see two peoples living peacefully side by side, you get an escalation of this kind of violence. And there's no way of creating a peace process if there isn't reaching out. And if those who aren't on the extremist sides of both arguments are in power, it's very, very difficult to see how that would work. So for Hamas, obviously, they don't recognise the right of Israel to exist.
Well, not only that, they want to destroy it.
Exactly. They don't recognise the right of Israel to exist. They're supported by other players in the Middle East. There's all sorts of proxy wars going on, but at the centre of it is the fact that those who tried to build bridges and make peace were assassinated by the extremists in their own camps. And now what you've got is no process, no place to try to build a centre ground, and more escalating violence and fear. And it's very, very difficult without the intervention of countries like America that might be able to broker some kind of process and de-escalate to see things getting any better.
Lee Rowley, it's interesting today, America and Russia has called for a ceasefire, but Benjamin Netanyahu isn't having any of it. But going back to the question, do you think that there can ever be a peace whilst Hamas not just remains in control of Gaza, but has this clause about wanting to destroy Israel in its constitution?
I think it's already been highlighted how difficult that is when you have an organisation that doesn't recognise the right of Israel to exist, who wants to drive the population of Israel into the sea, who fires rockets indiscriminately at civilian areas in Israel, and who isn't terribly good on a lot of the things that we take for granted in liberal Western democracies. There's a lot of people on this panel, including myself, who Hamas are not very keen on who they love. And, that is something which it makes it extremely...
I think that's the understatement of the week, isn't it, Lee?
And, there wouldn't be many of us left, would there?
No, there really wouldn't.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? That you have a very, very extreme organisation which took over the area it controls, not by democratic and peaceful methods, but by violence a number of years ago. At the same time, as responsible members of the international community, you have to work out ways in which you can try and de-escalate the situation. You can try and make people come around the table, but you have to do it on the basis of an acceptance that there needs to be a two-state solution, and that starts with the acceptance that one country does not need to be exterminated.
But when you have the Israeli ambassador who was sitting in this studio with me last Thursday, effectively saying that she's not in favour of a two-state solution. I think that ship maybe has sailed. India and Ndidi, I'm going to ask you to be relatively brief on this one, if I can. India, let's go to you first.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important that we make the distinction between the state of Israel and Jewish people generally, because it doesn't always follow that every Jewish person supports what Israel is doing. So I'm going to speak up a little bit for the Palestinians here, as we've heard a lot of pro-Israel rhetoric. I mean, at the end of the day, the Palestinians were there first. They have been squeezed over a number of years. You now effectively have 3 pockets of Palestinian areas within Israel. Travel's restricted, they cannot vote. And I think when you get in that situation, when you're cornered and you are desperate, then bad things will happen. And at the end of the day, Israel do have the might of the US supporting them, while Palestine don't. They have very few friends. So while I'm not an expert on the subject, my gut feeling is that the Palestinians do have a case to answer. I was listening to the Israeli ambassador to the UK, who was on your show just earlier today, and she has all the charm of a hungry crocodile. I just cannot see a peace coming with the likes of her in charge. And it's
what about Hamas? What about Hamas, though? I mean, given what their views, their stated views on Israel, and given some of their, shall we say, socially conservative views on many of the subjects that most of the people on this panel and indeed sitting in this presenter's chair hold dear, I find it incredible that people on the left seem to sympathise with Hamas to the extent that they do.
Yeah, well, honestly, Ian, I'm definitely not on the left. I'm definitely more to the right. But I think
you've hidden it well tonight, India, if I may say so.
Yeah, I know. But I think Israel as well, if you look at the trajectory of what's happened over the decades, I would say that a lot of Palestinians would feel that the end game for the state of Israel is for there to be no Palestinians in Israel. So they're both saying the same things.
But I mean,
This is what I was saying about the extremists. You've got to have some common ground if you can build bridges and then build a solution. It has been done in other conflicts. If you think about what happened with the Good Friday Accords and peace in the island of Ireland, it can be done. Everything can be done with politics. That doesn't mean it's easy. When the extremists are winning on both sides, it makes it very, very difficult indeed to build enough trust to move forwards.
And Ndidi, I'm going to ask for brevity because I'm 6 minutes late for a break.
That's fine. Angela's literally just said what I was going to say, in the sense that, of course, we have to believe it can be done, because what is the alternative? Once again, we're in danger of, I guess, losing sight of the fact that there are innocents and children and the civilians that are getting caught up whilst the rest of the world debates. So we have to believe that there can be a solution. Otherwise, what else is the alternative?
Thank you very much indeed. More of your calls in a moment. It's 8:51.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 8:54. Don't forget, Cross Question will return next Monday at 8 o'clock, Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going 3 days a week from next week. Now, India Willoughby, Angela Eagle, Ndidi, Okezie and Lee Rowley still with me taking your calls. Let's go to Angela in Notting Hill. Angela, hi, what's your question, please?
I would like to ask, given that nurse resigned, what is Boris's response? What respect do you actually have for nurses? Because they actually put themselves on the line. They got some 1% pay rise, which is actually nothing in the big scheme of things. What do you intend to actually do for them? How are you going to show them respect? Because giving a clap on Thursdays or whatever it was, that's nothing. What will you tangibly do for them?
Well, this is on the back, obviously, of the nurse that helped treat Boris Johnson when he was in hospital suffering from COVID, announced that she's quit the NHS. I think that was announced yesterday. India Willoughby, let's start with you on this. Are NHS staff and nurses in particular given enough respect by the government?
I think they are given enough respect, but it's not respect they necessarily want. It's money, as the callers just illustrated there. 1%, I think the inflation rate doubled between March and April to 1.5%. So that's already a negative. It's been wiped out. But the really tough reality, and this applies to everybody, not just nurses, is that the pot is bare. I've been listening to the news today, and I've heard Labour cry that we're actually cutting the amount of money we're sending abroad to health organisations in India, as we've mentioned, Uganda, etc. And what is the priority? Obviously, if people are wanting money sent abroad to help foreign health services, well, that should go here. And while I have a lot of sympathy with nurses, and I don't know what the answer is in terms of, realistically compensating them for the tremendous efforts and ordeals that they've been through this year, the reality is that there isn't much money to go around. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there actually in the private sector that would be grateful of just a job and 1%, even if it is a negative at the moment.
Angela Eagle.
Well, before I was elected to Parliament, I used to help write the nurses and midwives' pay claim, and perhaps I wasn't successful enough at ensuring that they're paid enough money when I was doing that. Clapping isn't good enough. I noticed in France they gave nurses a 10% rise. I think that clapping doesn't pay the bills. We need to ensure that there aren't so many vacancies in the health service, because that means that nurses and those other professionals that work in the health service to keep it going have to work more and more. And I don't think we should underestimate the trauma that they've been through and the bravery that they've shown in going into work day in, day out, dealing with a virus that we knew very little about at the beginning, except that it was killing very, very many people. And we have to find a way of recognising them that isn't just standing on our doorsteps and clapping. And I do think that in the extraordinary circumstances, we should be looking at giving them a far more substantial pay rise than they're getting. It's just as, we've just got to prize our public sector workers far more than we have done to date. Remember, nearly 900 healthcare workers died of COVID-19, some of them very young indeed, before we even had a vaccine.
Lee Rowley, the politics of this are interesting, aren't they? Because, of course, in Scotland, nurses are getting, I think, a 4% pay rise. In Wales, it's something similar. And the Independent Commission, I think, were recommending a 2.1% rise. In retrospect, would it have not been better just to accept the 2.1%, just to sort of make people feel, well, it is a little bit above inflation? That would have shown a lot more respect, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, this whole debate is predicated on the idea that a decision has been made. A decision hasn't been made yet. We are still awaiting the response from the Pay Commission, and when it comes, hopefully in the next few weeks, it's not far away now, I don't think, the government will review it. The whole point why it goes through that process is to make sure we take into account things like the number of people coming into the profession, the number of people leaving the profession, the morale in the profession, all of those really important things. And the government will look at it when it comes. But India is right. There is a broader frame and challenge around government spending. We've just spent nearly £400 billion more than we expected to this time last year, or just over this time last year. The right thing to do because of coronavirus. And we want to, of course, try and support those people who've worked in the front line, whether it be in the hospitals or anywhere else, as much as is possible. But I think we just wait to see what comes from the Commission. The government will review it, and then obviously we can have the debate and discussion.
Lee, can I just mention
No, in India, we're really running out of time, and I've got to get Ndidi into this as well. Sorry, apologies.
I mean, just to say, I think it's a complete and utter missed opportunity, and I think once again, all of the things that Angela just said, we knew about even before the pandemic. I think not just nurses, but porters and all the people that had to go out where we all had the luxury of going in. I think that it goes beyond respect. I think it's a pure and utter acknowledgement of the critical role that they played to keep this country moving. And so I think I completely understand the whole people don't understand, but I'm sure there's a lot of complexity around the money. But I think we've shown that we find money for things that we prioritise. And I think this would have been a moment to really make a stand about who we prioritise and why.
Right, quick final text from Tracy in Orpington. The trailer for the Friends reunion is now out. My husband and I are very excited. What TV show would the panel like to bring back? I have to say, I've never watched a full episode of Friends. I just don't get it. I know, isn't that a terrible admission? Lee, what would you like to bring back?
Well, not Friends.
Are you all? I'm out of here. What's going on?
I think I quite like the Krypton Factor to come back, which is probably showing my age. And if that's not possible, just finish Motherland, and we love that. So another series as soon as possible, please.
India? Big Brother?
I'm a great lover of TV theme tunes. So for me, it would either be Minder, Flashing Blade, or the Double Deckers.
I have created a Spotify playlist of about 100 TV theme tunes. You need to download
fantastic. I'm going to check that out, Iain.
Angela.
Fantastic.
I think anything, the royal family or dinner ladies, because I'm a huge fan of Victoria Wood and Caroline Aherne, and both of them were comedy geniuses. Both of them died in the same year, and I still haven't got over it.
Ndidi, I'm expecting big things from you here.
Well, first of all, it would be Friends. How dare you all? So the reunion doesn't go far enough. So it would be Friends. But if I had to pick something different, it may not be classic enough. But please bring the Queen's Gambit back. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Oh, great.
It's a
terrific choice.
We're now back. Okay.
Very good choice.
Well, my choice would be Crossroads. Which just shows how old I am, doesn't it? Right, India Willoughby, Dame Angela Eagle, Ndidi Okezie and Lee Rowley, thank you very much for joining us. If you missed any of the programme, you can catch it up on the LBC YouTube channel, or indeed the Cross Question podcast, which will be available from about midnight. In a moment, we are going to talk about Dementia Action Week. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Surge testing and increased vaccinations are being expanded to new areas as Indian coronavirus cases continue to rise across the UK. Almost 3,000 now being found with evidence showing the new strain is more transmissible. But England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, says it's not inevitable. Cases will keep growing.
People can slow it down through cautious behaviour. The other competitor in the race is vaccine delivery. And the NHS is doing everything it can to turbo boost that.
Thousands of people in the UK are going to be given a third COVID vaccine as part of a trial. Volunteers will have one of 7 different doses to assess the impact on their immune systems. Boris Johnson's repeated a warning people shouldn't go on holiday to amber list countries. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's accused the government of sending mixed messages.